Welcome to Emmanuel Church Marlborough. My name is Ruben. I serve as the pastor here. Thank you for coming. It's brilliant to be with you. Let me just pray before we turn back to the Bible. Dear God, thank you for the Bible. Please help us to understand it and to love Jesus more. Sometimes people change their names. Destiny Hope Cyrus changed her name to Miley Cyrus. Reginald Kenneth Dwight changed his name to Elton John. Ilyena Vasilievna Mironov changed her name to Helen Mirren. I could go on. Sometimes people change their names. I hope you like your name. I hope you don't want to change it. But sometimes maybe we think, I wish I were different. I wish I were a different kind of person. The great thing, if we're trusting in Jesus, then God has already given us a new name. He's called us Christians. And the greatest blessing is to understand and live out that identity. We see that very dramatically in today's Bible reading. I've been really blown away by this true story, and I hope you will be too. We're nearly 2,000 years before Jesus. God has promised to bless the world through the man Jacob. And in today's story, God meets Jacob. But before we explore the story in detail, I want to just zoom in to one verse in the story, which is the heart of it, and it unlocks the whole thing. I'm in Genesis chapter 32 and verse 28. Genesis 32 verse 28, it says this: Then the man said, Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Now, Jacob's name means literally trickster. But actually, quite literally, it means he grabs the heel. His new name, Israel, means he struggles with God. Now, why? Why the name change? God explains it is because you have struggled with God and with humans. As long as you were Jacob, you struggled with humans. You grabbed the heel. But now you're Israel. You are to struggle not with humans, but with God. We're going to see today, stop being a Jacob. Start being an Israel. Stop wrestling with people for blessing. Start wrestling with God for blessing. Before we get into the story, it would help me and you a lot if you've read it. So if you haven't already, please press pause, read Genesis chapter 32, and then come back in. First then, stop wrestling with people for blessing. Jacob has spent his whole life trying to grab the blessing from other people. Flick through Jacob's family photo album with me. The first photo is not for the mantelpiece because it's one of Jacob being born. Even as Jacob was born with his twin brother Esau, Jacob was grabbing on to his brother's heel, hence the name. Photo 1. Photo 2 is Jacob is sitting outside his tent. And what's happening is Jacob is setting a bowl of stew to his brother Esau in exchange for all the things which that culture said went with being the firstborn son. He's wrestling with people for blessing. Photo 3. Jacob is in his dad Isaac's tent. He's tricking his blind dad Isaac into giving him the prayer of blessing which Isaac had prepared for his favorite son, Esau. Photo 4. Having run away from furious Esau, Jacob is now with his uncle Laban far away, wrestling for the blessing of marrying Laban's beautiful daughter, Rachel. Last photo. Jacob is wrestling with Uncle Laban again, this time for the largest share of sheep and goats on the family farm. Jacob has spent his life being a Jacob, the one who grabs the heel, who wrestles with people for blessing, But God says stop. That is the first half of our Bible reading. Just look at a part of it with me, would you? Genesis 32 and verse 1. Can you see that? Genesis 32 and verse 1. Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God." So he named that place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He instructed them, "This is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I've been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now, I am sending this message to my lord, that I may find favor in your eyes." When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." In a great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. Jacob and his family have left Uncle Laban in northern Iraq. They're going home to the promised land. But surprisingly, perhaps, they take a detour to face up to Jacob's estranged brother Esau. They don't have to go this way. But to stop wrestling Esau, it seems Jacob must face him. I wonder if there's someone that you need to stop running away from. Now, I think we're afraid of what would happen if we stop trying to get blessing from people. Jacob has tried to fight Esau. He's tried flight from Esau, that's running away. And now he has fright. Because Esau is coming against him with 400 men. Fight, flight, fright. The only F left is faith. And for the first time in Jacob's life, we hear him pray. Listen to Jacob's prayer and look out for the faith. Faith not in his own abilities, but faith in God's goodness despite his failures. Let me read from verse 9 with you. Then Jacob prayed, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, 'Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper,' I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and will make you descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." Did you see Jacob's faith? In the very next verse, Jacob starts to send presents ahead to his brothers Esau to try and placate him, calm him down. Maybe you think, "Oh, is that faith?" I mean, if it's really faith, but he's sending presents, isn't he trying to wrestle again for blessing? Well, no. Faith doesn't mean to say you stop doing anything practical. What's changed now is whereas before Jacob was trying to get blessings from people, now Jacob is giving blessings away. Imagine two pet hamsters in a cage. Imagine these hamsters start wrestling with each other. Imagine them maybe in those old costumes like WWE wrestlers. There they are, these hamsters wrestling with each other, grappling over food. It's actually crazy. One hamster doesn't need the other hamster's blessing to get food. The food comes from the owner. And yet how often we're like those pet hamsters, wrestling, grappling with each other in our hearts, if not in our actions, instead of talking with God. Let's stop it. Wonder which of those family snapshots could be a photo of our lives. Is it Jacob the child fighting with his brother? Is it Jacob with a soup? He's jealous of what Esau's got. Is it Jacob with his dad? He's desperate for his father's approval. Is it Jacob with his father-in-law, yearning after romance? Is it Jacob with the boss, clutching at money? These may be real blessings to pray for and to be thankful for. And yet if they dominate us, they make us jealous or cross, if they stop us from being kind or truthful or thankful, then let's ask God, please help us stop it. We've seen first, stop wrestling with people for blessing. Now, it's easy to say that, isn't it? But how do we do it? Well, like those hamsters, we need to look up. We need to look up to the owner. So secondly, start wrestling with God for blessing. Start wrestling with God for blessing. Here's our final point, and it's verses 22 to 32. We'll come to that in a minute. But did you remember God changes Jacob's name? He's not the heel grabber anymore. He's Israel, the one who struggles with God. If we're Christians, then God has also given us a new identity, an identity now not of comparison with other people, but identified by the compassion of God. Let's get into this amazing story, shall we? Jacob is about to cross the Jabbok. Now, this is cool. Jacob is about to cross the Jabbok River to get into the Promised Land. But before Jacob crosses the Jabbok, he must do some Jabbecking. Literally, in Hebrew, that's wrestling, okay? Jabbecking. To enter the Promised Land, you must first meet with God. Look at verse 24 with me, would you? Verse 24, Genesis 32, verse 24. So Jacob was left alone. Verse 22. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched, as he wrestled with the man. Night falls on the river bank. We see the stars twinkling, and hear the insects cricketing. Jacob is alone until, bizarrely, a man turns up and starts wrestling with him. Now, who is this man? The man says nothing. We can't even see his face. It is dark. Maybe you feel you've been struggling recently and you're not even sure what with, and God seems far away. Maybe God is closer than you think. Who is Jacob's secret wrestler? Let's see. Jacob says in verse 30, I have seen God face to face. So Jacob is wrestling with God. Now, why does verse 25 say that the man can't overpower Jacob? If he's God, why can't he overpower Jacob? Well, presumably because God graciously comes down in human form to Jacob's level. It's a little bit like a mum or dad playing football with their toddler. And most of the time, they just kindly let the toddler score some goals. But every now and again, the parent shows their flash of Lionel Messi-esque skills and scores a great goal. Just the touch of God's finger is enough to dislocate Jacob's hip. Jacob is wrestling with God. Now, what is he wrestling for? Jacob is wrestling for blessing. Did you see that? Verse 26. Then the man said, Let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Jacob is wrestling for blessing. But why does God say, Let me go, for it is nearly daybreak? It's nearly morning. The eastern sky is beginning to go grey before dawn. Why does God need to get away before dawn? Because God says in Exodus chapter 33 that God is so holy, so good and fair, that if sinners like Jacob and me see God's face, they cannot live. If they're still wrestling when the sun comes up, Jacob will die. But Jacob doesn't seem to care. Jacob senses this is the one who can give me the blessing I've thirsted for all my life, and I will cling on until I get it. What are the blessings that he's wrestling for? What kind of blessings should we be wrestling with God for? Look at verse 29, would you? Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask me my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." Wow. What are the blessings? What should we be expecting from God? What Jacob wants above all is to know this mysterious wrestler. We don't know the words God used to bless him, but we do know that immediately afterwards Jacob said, "I saw God face to face and my life was spared." See, to know God, to see God, and yet for our life to be spared, that is the greatest blessing you could dream of. It should be a contradiction in terms for sinners like Jacob and me and you. To see God and live to tell the tale? How could that be? Why, far from being blessed, was Jacob not blasted? Because Jesus swapped places with Jacob. See, nearly 2,000 years later, it was also night time, and Jesus also wrestled with God with blood and sweat and tears. Jesus prayed for blessing. He prayed for blessing. Jesus said, "God, take this cup of curse. Take this cup away from me, if there's any way. Yet not my will, but yours be done." It was the night before Jesus died. Jesus knew that he was facing the next day the cup of God's curse, not for wrongdoing that Jesus had done. Jesus was perfect, but for Jacob's wrongdoing, and for my wrongdoing, and yours, if we'll receive it. So if we receive Jesus as Saviour and Lord, then like Jacob, we might meet God not in curse, but in blessing. The blessing of knowing God by His Spirit eternally. Friend, won't you receive that today if you never have before? Maybe you say, "Reuben, I do believe that, but I don't feel very blessed at the moment. I don't feel very blessed." And maybe Jacob didn't feel very blessed either as he walked away with a dislocated hip. Did you get that? He walked away with a limp, verse 31. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. We tend to think, if I'm suffering, God doesn't love me. On the contrary, God's people are those like Jacob, who experience both life and limping at the same time. That is genuine Christianity. The Bible puts these bang together. Let me read from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where it says, "God made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God displayed in the face of Christ." Did you see that? In the face of Christ. There is the blessing that God offers, to see by faith the face of Christ and to find in him eternal life. But there in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, in the very next verse, it says, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay." We're the jars of clay, so fragile, so broken. We have this treasure in jars of clay to show us that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. Do you walk with a limp? Maybe not literally, but maybe there is some great sorrow that you feel, some weakness or frustration. Maybe in the office, or the classroom, or the home, or by your front gate. Maybe that's a very tough place to be. Maybe especially because you're a Christian. Why would God have let Jacob hurt like that? Why would God let us face that pressure every day? We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is not from us, to show it's not from us, it's from him. God let the Apostle Paul live with some kind of suffering. Paul called it his thorn in the flesh. How could we cope with something like that? God said to Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. My grace is sufficient for you. Think of the godliest Christian you know, perhaps the humblest, the most faithful. And I'm pretty sure you will find they've been refined through suffering. They walk with a limp. So let's wrestle with God for blessing. Maybe you're thinking, why wrestle? I thought the Christian faith was about resting. Didn't Jesus say, my yoke is easy, my burden is light, you will find rest for your souls? Yes, he did. But as the preacher John Piper said, resting begins with wrestling. Resting begins with wrestling. Apostle Paul wrote in Romans chapter 15, I urge you to join me in my struggle by praying to God for me. ... Why? So that I may come to you with joy and in your company be refreshed. Resting begins with wrestling. Elsewhere, there's that Bible hero Epaphras in Colossians chapter 4. It says he's always wrestling in prayer for you, that you may stand firm in all the will of God, mature and fully assured. Resting begins with wrestling in prayer. Don't give up. Let's keep on wrestling with God in prayer for gospel blessings. If you live in Marlborough, come to our, in fact, even if you don't, join in our Zoom Coffee Central prayer meeting this Thursday. Please come. Daily in our homes, keep wrestling in prayer. As we close, maybe sometimes we think, I wish I were different. Maybe not, I wish I had a different name, but I wish I was a different kind of person. If we're trusting in Jesus, then God has already given us a new name. Not Miley Cyrus or Elton John, but Christian. I pray God will help us to stop wrestling like all the world does with people for blessing, and to start wrestling as Christians with God in prayer for the blessing that He promises, that we and others will know Him more and live. Amen.